Well, if you live in a rural area or you maybe live close to a rural area, in fact, on our Good Morning Walk just last Saturday, you may have seen the combine harvesters out in the field in action, taking in the harvest this year. Yes, indeed, it is harvest time again for, well, not only just the UK, but a lot of people throughout the West, indeed, at the moment, certainly throughout Europe. And of course, what problem were we having last year? Recruiting people to be pickers, to work on the farm, to essentially bring in the harvest, which caused millions and millions of tons of fresh fruit, vegetables, and crops to go unpicked, and as a result, rot in the fields. Now, why is this? Well, we need skilled labor. And in many of these cases, in these rural areas, you need people to come to these areas. Most of your workforce has left these areas because there were no jobs anymore. And this type of picking is very physically demanding. It is actually quite high skilled in order to be able to collect the fruit without causing it too much damage when you're actually in the process of picking it. There's a very specific way you have to do and sort of collect the fruit itself. And not a lot of people want to do it. However, we were very, very dependent on a lot of people, especially from Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, coming over here just once a year. And thanks to freedom movement, they could come over here for harvest time, do their job, and they'd move back. Or maybe they'd even stay. Perfect example is Boston. Boston grew massively because of this, and it actually massively benefited sort of the area of Boston with new businesses, new people, new investments in the area from the government, sort of schools, etc., etc. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about the farmers' problems, because once again they are facing the exact same problem they were facing last year, and as I sort of predicted, this would become an annual problem. And what we're seeing again this year, it's an annual problem. So let's go into this and find out why UK farmers are having to go over 7,000 miles to recruit labourers. So before we go diving into this, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and our foundation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There is also the Pony Club, the YouTube subscription button down below, where you get emojis and badges when you subscribe to that. And also, there is the YouTube thank you button down below as well. So let's go over to this with The Guardian with the title of Why UK Farmers Are Recruiting Fruit Pickers from 7,000 Miles Away. As The Guardian investigation reports that Indonesian workers are picking fruit for leading UK supermarkets have now ended up with debts of over £5,000 for a single season, we look at what is driving this crisis in Britain's agricultural labour and how the exploitation can be avoided. So why are farmers recruiting fruit pickers from 7,000 miles away? A shortage of farm workers created by Brexit led to 8,000 tons of berries going unpicked last year, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine only made the shortage more critical. Ukrainians made up 2/3 of all workers arriving on seasonal worker visas back in 2012, with almost 20,000 workers on British farms. When the war broke out weeks before the picking season was due to start, recruiters had to look beyond Ukraine. And with the rise in farm workers arriving from Indonesia, Nepal, Vietnam, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, so they're having to go even further, and that will probably cause even more problems and even more costs for farmers themselves. So how much do farms rely on seasonal workers from overseas? A great deal. In 2019, about 2,500 workers came to Britain on a pilot of a seasonal worker visa. This year, the number is expected to be 40,000, with many coming from distant countries and little funding or infrastructure to actually investigate the circumstances of their recruitment. So why are pickers on UK farms arriving thousands of pounds in debt to brokers in Bali? AG Recruitment, one of only 4 licensed agencies allowed to recruit under the UK seasonal worker scheme, was tasked with fulfilling a shortfall in farm workers this year. This included Indonesia. With no provisions in experience in Indonesia, AG sought the help of Jakarta-based Al Jazeera Manpower, which appears to have gone to brokers on other islands who charged exorbitant fees to the workers they introduced. The managing director, AG Douglas Armses, said he personally recruited candidates from Jakarta for Clockhouse Farm in Kent, and the applications and visas were only processed by AG. He was unaware of any of the brokers levying these charges and said that he was extremely concerned to be learned of these allegations that have been raised. So now we're having huge problems where these laborers have been brought at an expense to themselves and are ending up in huge spirals of debt. This is not good. This is exploitation on a really bad industrial scale. So, do laborers have enough work to actually pay their debts? Some pickers at Clockhouse Farms were worried when they started work that they could end up trapped in debt, as multiple laborers were initially on 0-hour contracts, despite this being against the rules for those on seasonal worker visas since April of 2020. With at least one worker making less than £300 a week, once accommodation costs were charged, some were very anxious about the work running out as the picking season finishes before the end of their 6-month visa. Clockhouse has changed the contracts to guarantee a minimum of 20 hours after the Guardian approached it for the response. The farm said it conducted an annual audit of its payroll and found that workers picked on average for over 48 hours a week, meaning that their income was more than $2,000 a month. So what about workers who were not charged illegal fees? It is commonplace within the rules for pickers to bear the cost of their flight and visas. Despite the experts saying that the best practice is an employer pays approach, this means that workers arrive with significant debts when they are flying from the other side of the world, even without the extra charges. So will workers charge those fees get their money back? Unlikely, said Dora Olivia Voller, the chief executive of the Work Rights Centre. She said, "The real tragedy is that compensating these workers will be extremely difficult. This is because the enforcement agencies in the UK are not yet equipped to pursue and prosecute these rogue recruiters registered abroad. To go after them, we would need sustained collaboration between enforcement agencies in the UK and those in countries that supply the British farms with agricultural labour. Unfortunately, this can take years to build, which is why the workers from Indonesia, Nepal, and parts of Central Asia, countries that were all but invisible to these enforcement agencies until recently, are particularly at risk today." So does the fruit end up on my table? Quite possibly. Clockhouse, where several of these workers say they have debts between £4,000 and £5,000 to brokers in Bali, and supplies supermarkets with strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, plums, and apples. Its clients include Marks and Spencer, Waitrose, Tesco's, and Sainsbury's. And of course, the supermarkets have launched an urgent investigation into these allegations. And Clockhouse said that he was very deeply concerned and was working with the authorities to investigate. So, who is supposed to stop this from happening or act when it does? This is where the buck passing starts. The Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, which operates in England and Wales, has a remit to protect the vulnerable and exploited workers, but the Home Office was quick to point out that the GLLA cannot investigate labour abuse or exploitation in other countries. The Home Office says it is incumbent on foreign governments to investigate, but the cash-strapped nations exporting these workers do not necessarily have the resources or inclination. The GLA itself has a budget of just £7 million, less than what the Home Office actually spends on publications, stationery, and printing. So, as you can see, this is already causing a very serious problem and is causing different problems. And we should be concerned that we are bringing in people who are then being exploited, having these massive debts, having to pay it back to these people who introduced them to these jobs in the first place, having to pay off, these exorbitant debts, and we have to be very, very worried about this, because we do not want, exploited labor, in this country performing these tasks. And this is because of Brexit. The recruiters have had to go further afield, and they have to go further afield to these countries where there are no labor protections, where there are no these things, and we should be worried. But this is one thing where internationally we should be advocating for these rights for these people in these countries to have. If you want to come and work in the UK, then you have to have the same rights as us. This is unfortunately not what we are doing when we are seeing many of these trade deals, or at least some of these sample trade deals being done. But it is what the EU does. It is and can do that because of the size of its economy, because of how big it is. It can command a lot of power, and a lot of changes be made to not only make sure that products arrived aren't made by slave labor and aren't made by exploited people, but can also then help those people in those countries by saying, hey, you have to raise labor standards, you have to make sure that these people are paid and that they aren't exploited. Something that we should maybe be promoting, but unfortunately we're not. And of course, this is yet again a problem of Brexit, and of course this is probably costing these farmers even more money, and I expect there to be probably another side of the cost of having to sort of do this themselves. So yet another big problem for down on the farm in the UK, in Brexit land. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and one donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.